Good to see you, Chris. How are you tonight?
Fantastic. Let's play Ignore Kelvin and see how long till he realizes his mic does work indeed.
Funny.
I thought I was.
See if I'll share my peanuts with you.
I brought cashews again if anybody wants some.
Since this is a work session, I figure entertaining backgrounds, as long as there's no copyright infringement or anything, should be okay. Melissa, good to see you. Looks like Kayleen's out there as well.
You're on mute, Melissa. Sorry.
I'm throwing a fit here and you can't even hear me. That's the best way, right? Okay. I literally just got off work. It has been so freaking busy. It's insane. So I apologize, but I have my dinner while we're here.
I guess I need my budget book. Hold on a second.
to shut my camera off so you don't have to watch me eat or what? I don't care. I'll leave it on. You can watch me eat.
My husband just brought me dinner, but I didn't have time to eat it, so it'll be in the fridge.
Well, I'm going to eat because I haven't had anything since lunch because work has been so busy. This is crazy. Crazy time.
All right, well, let me see here. Where's the participants option? There's the
I'll slide out
chat.
of the way when I take a bite.
Okay, participants. Corbin, let's make Corbin a panelist. I see Brian Clegg is out there as well. Let's promote him so he can be ready for his presentation.
Promote him, but don't give him a raise. No money.
I pick on Brian so much though, it's probably doesn't even phase him. Like, wait, what am I presenting? Yeah, probably doesn't even cross his mind. All right, Alan, are we good to start recording? And looks like Alan said we did start at 5:30, so we'll go ahead and I will call to order this meeting of the West Jordan City Council Committee of the Whole. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the idea of the Committee of the Whole, this is not a regular city council meeting. This is essentially, it's an extra meeting to give us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the budget that's been provided to us, to give us an opportunity to discuss and share our thoughts. It's not a regular council session, but with the Committee of the Whole, all members of the council are members of the committee. So while attendance is not required at this one like a regular council meeting, it's something that we want to make sure every member of the city council has the opportunity to have all of the budget information shared with them, everything presented, has ample opportunity to submit any questions or have those responded to. So that's why tonight we are having a work session as a committee of the whole rather than as a city council meeting. And this will be a workshop type format. So you don't necessarily need to be you don't necessarily need to wait to be called on by the chair. You can go ahead and jump in. Most of the conversation tonight will be driven by our finance director, which is Denise Stack. And unless there are any questions, I will stop sharing and turn it over to Denise.
Now I should unmute, huh?
It'll make for a longer meeting, but
Keep me mute. It would go really quick, wouldn't it?
Hey, one question for you, Chairman, is with, the committee of, how we have the committees that have been set up.
I'm having a real hard time hearing you.
Sorry, maybe this is better. I need to plug in my headset. I just thought of that. So the Budget and Audit Committee and the Utility Rate and Enterprise Funds Committee, is there anything that you feel that as we're going over this that we should take particular note of? I mean, of course, in those categories, but that was my question is, of course, everybody wants to chime in on this, but is there something specific that we should be looking out for to maybe do more in-depth study and report back to the whole council?
Not necessarily at this point, but we'll see how things evolve throughout the evening. As Kelvin and I spoke about how we wanted to treat this, with the budget committee just being formalized at our last city council meeting, it puts us pretty far down the path towards the budget. So rather than try to change things up, figure out how to best operate the committee as well as round out the budget year, just to keep things moving smoothly, we'll continue the way we started back in January, which is just with all the members as involved given the opportunity to be as involved as they'd like to be. But at this point, there's nothing extra that I would anticipate for the budget committee, other than perhaps to jot down ideas and thoughts as to how the committee could be optimally used next year. And even as I say next year, maybe the committee needs to start sooner than next year, perhaps even August, September, October, preparing for the next budget year. So just getting ideas to figure out how should this be functioning, how should the mechanics of this look. That, I guess that would be my one ask, but that's somewhat outside of the budget process, more committee process.
Thank you.
And my thought also is that as we start getting further, as we get past the first part of the fiscal year, as Chris mentioned, I'm also thinking that the council or the committee is also going to be the first line of looking at where we're at as we progress, to know whether we need budget adjustments during the year, and to work with Denise and make sure we know where we need to be with budget adjustments and those kind of things. Because I think that over the course of the next couple of years, we're going to have to watch budgets extremely close. That at least that's my thought, and make sure that we're right on track. But that's just me. So that was my thought as well, besides what Chris had to say.
And
Thank you.
can I share what we did at the school board when we created these types of committees? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Proceed.
Yeah, the budget committee met every month with the finance director, and then quarterly they would come back to the body as a whole and report what, or if they had anything significant, like they came up with an idea with the finance director, a new idea of how to pay teachers. So they came up with the idea and then brought it to the body of the whole, and we discussed that. And from that, a new committee was created. But that's kind of how they worked it. And then when we got to the time of year we're at now, then they'd bring everything to us, and then we'd have these larger discussions as the whole board. And that was effective. So it's just a thought of maybe a direction we could go.
It's a good thought. And I'd encourage the budget committee to bring back a proposal of how they'd like to see the committee function throughout the year. I did almost get too far down the road before forgetting to acknowledge we also have Corbin Lee joining us from the mayor's office. I don't think we have the mayor here tonight, but thank you, Corbin, for being here.
Thank you. The mayor's traveling, and I wasn't sure if he'd be able to log in. He was going to try, but it was going to be iffy.
Or keep a virtual background of his office warm for him. And it looks like we've got council member Lamb as well. Thanks, Chad. I guess committee member Lamb in this forum. Okay, Denise, all yours.
All right, Corbin, you ready for your CARES Act piece?
Yeah, I'm ready. We go to the first slide on the CARES Act. Council, we want to update you about the CARES Act. Last week, the mayor forwarded you an email that we got from County Mayor Jenny Wilson saying how much money would come to each city. Denise, I'm not seeing the updated slide. Can you go to slide 1 or log out and log back?
Oh, stop sharing and share again.
Yeah. Essentially the federal government in the CARES Act, they set aside $150 billion for coronavirus relief aid. Most of that Utah money is being distributed at the state level, but at the county level, Salt Lake County got a direct appropriation of CARES Act money.
Is
And
that
so-
working?
Yep, thank you. Perfect, yeah, go to the next slide. Salt Lake County got enough money for 87, well, they got a lot of money, but the portion that's being distributed directly to cities was $87.50 per resident. It was a straight population distribution. That comes to a little over $10 million to the city of West Jordan. That's going to be distributed to West Jordan in 3 phases. The first phase is available now, available soon, and it's about 3.4 million. And then there will be 2 subsequent phases that are in equal amounts. All of this money needs to be spent by October 1st. Go ahead and go to the next slide. But it's highly, it's challenging. It's hard to spend that much money. It's highly restricted. It's one-time funds, and the funds must be spent on expenses relating to the coronavirus. Denise, will you go to the next slide?
That's it.
Or you might have to unshare your screen again and share again.
Did Sharon get
why I
paused?
kinda- That's kind of why I thought maybe we should run this off PDF. It just always stops during.
That's okay. I'll keep explaining. So we have $3.4 million in the short term, possibly as much as $10 million over the course of the late summer and early fall. The money is one time, it's restricted, it has to be spent on things related to the coronavirus and related to our response to the coronavirus. We have a team working together on a spending plan right now. Jared Smith is going to be the point person on tracking all of the expenditures, tracking the reimbursements, and getting pre-approvals from the county.
Hey Corbin, without looking at numbers right now, have we spent any money on any coronavirus related stuff already?
Yes, some.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the first thing we're going to spend money on, or we're going to submit for reimbursement, is anything we've already spent related to the coronavirus, and that can go back as far as March 1st. So any overtime we've had from staff relating to the coronavirus, we've had our payroll tracking that overtime as it's directly related to coronavirus. Any purchases of PPE, sanitation supplies,
Headset, Zoom account.
Exactly. Anything like that that we've already spent money on that we can justify as being related to the coronavirus, we're going to put that in for reimbursement. Yeah, go ahead and go to the next page. Thank you, Denise. Thanks for switching it over to PDF. So everything that is already spent and reimbursable, we're going to submit that for reimbursement. Second is anything that is related to the coronavirus that we can justify as a coronavirus expenditure going forward, that will make us more resilient to pandemics, that will make us more flexible. So that may include things like additional sanitation, additional PPEs, but it also includes possibly staffing for extra cleaning of park bathrooms, staffing for extra cleaning of playgrounds, monitoring of a splash pad, or those kinds of things. It may include extra equipment for video conferencing capabilities improvements. It may include facility modifications to have screens to resist virus transmittal. It may include software and hardware for better digital communications, digital training, anything that would allow our departments to do transactions remotely or transactions online better. So for example, software that will allow community development to do all transactions online and permit processing online. Software that will allow us to communicate with the citizenry better online and digitally, all those kinds of things. So we're putting together a plan for those types of expenditures. And then third, the money can be spent on and should be spent on economic recovery in the community. And that's kind of a vague, it's kind of a vague term, but they want us to spend the money out into the community on things that support the local business community. So we don't know exactly what that will look like, but we're exploring and pushing for programs that will help the businesses in our community. It may be shop local programs, that may be rental assistance, it may be a distribution of PPEs, it may be utility hardships, it may be voucher distributions. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, and they're still kind of ironing out what the rules are for that community economic recovery reimbursement. So we are working on a plan, and we're trying to talk regularly with the county. So that's where we stand at the moment. Go ahead.
Corbin, I have a question. Because the rules in the Social Security Act specifically say that it's for costs not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as March 27, 2020.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't accounted for in the budget in March, which is the fiscal year that we're in, that means that based on that particular restriction, we can't spend any money past July 1st in a new fiscal year budget, correct?
My interpretation of that was we can use it to supplant things that were already in our budget, the budget that we had prior to March 1st or prior to March 27th. So we couldn't use it to supplant an expenditure we were already planning in the current fiscal year. We also want to make sure that it's not supplanting something that's in our upcoming budget. But if we can tie it back to the coronavirus, we definitely want to. We think this is a great opportunity for us to get some things done that we desperately need to do. And it may have some ability to help us with our budget, but we can't just take that 3.4 million and stick it in our rainy day fund, or we can't take that 3.4 million and make our regular payroll with that money.
No, I've got that, but it's got a lot of restrictions on it. And I want to make sure that we're meeting the exact requirements of the statute so that if we expend money, because it's very clear from what the Treasury's put out that it can only cover a cost that weren't accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27th, 2020. So it seems like it can only cover costs that for us were in FY19, unless there's a better interpretation of that from the state or the county. I just want to make sure that we're doing this right so that the feds don't come back and ask for money later.
Right. Agreed. Agree 100%. We're going to be very careful and ask 2 and 3 times before we spend that money to make sure we're going to get reimbursed for it. So we'll double check that, Kelvin. Thank you. Anyways, that's what I have for the CARES Act. As we formulate our plan, I want to give you regular updates. It will require, I assume, a budget amendment because we need to recognize the grant revenue and then recognize the expenditures, the way we're going to spend that revenue. So Jared Smith's been working on this very diligently since Monday. We got the details on Friday. He or I would like to give you another update at the budget meeting next week, at least just a quick 5-minute update at that time. We're aiming for possible budget amendment in your June regular council meetings. Any other questions? Okay. All right, that's all I have for agenda item number 1.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is talk real quick about how to read the budget book. Some of you have had this budget book before and others haven't. So I'm going to go quickly through this. Are you seeing a screen with the general fund summary and 2 charts at the bottom now? Yes, okay. So one of the things that we've included in the budget book that last year was in there as well, but in previous years before that was not. And I think that this information is important because you're making decisions based on revenues and expenditures for the budget, but you're also making decisions based on what your reserves are at each of those fund levels. So previous budget books typically had a cash balance in there. I don't know why, but this is your reserve levels. So when you see the words beginning balance or ending fund balance, that's something that you really want to pay attention to as a council, because you need to know that this is the one year, right, when it's been reminded the most of what were our reserve levels going into this. If they weren't at a certain level, we would have been in a more difficult situation than we currently are. So typically when you're reading a budget, you're going to see revenues at the top so that you know what money would be able to be coming in. And then you're going to see expenditures below that. And then the bottom line after revenues less expenditures is going to be the contribution or use of fund balance. And I put that in parentheses, use, because if you see a number in parentheses, that means you're using reserves. If they're not in parentheses, then that means you're putting money towards reserves. So you can see what your reserve levels are. So this is the general fund. If we look at the water fund, for instance, we'll flip to page, sorry. Someone's sad. If you flip to the water fund, you'll see that on page 234 at the bottom there, there's beginning and ending fund balance and the contribution and use. You'll see that consistently throughout the budget book. So you'll know what are you approving and at what reserve level, because you may need to make adjustments to those. In addition to the beginning and ending fund balance and how much of the reserves you're either adding or using during a budget year, the budget book has the key fiscal management practices at the beginning that shows you, wow, this isn't moving back to where I want it to go. Let me go back. Are you seeing them? We went over those in one of our work sessions. So those are included in the budget book as well. Those are all the ones that you've reviewed. The budget calendar's in there. In addition, there's a summary called ending fund balances. Are you seeing that screen? Is it moving okay? Okay. You're just going to see ending fund balances. This is kind of a summary of how every fund ends. So you can see, okay, is that a level I'm comfortable with or not? And you can see what the funding source is. So you can see that the general fund there is on the top, and then roads capital. And then roads capital has 3 different kinds of reserves, and they shouldn't commingle. So you've got the general capital reserves, which you see as negative. You have impact fee reserves, which you see as positive. And you have road grant funds, which typically means the legislature's given us money for specific projects. And we've either got it on hold, or we're working on the project, or it's a project that they've allocated us through the legislature through a House bill or a Senate bill, but it's not a project that we're ready to take on yet for construction. And you're going to see some detail in the budget book about that as well. What else? I think that's all I can think of as far as like reading the budget book that is really important. It's organized by fund type and by department. We've added a staffing document that shows you exactly which positions are in the budget and what those grades are for those positions, and how some of them have changed. So you could see if the position was retitled or the grade was adjusted, how they were last year or year before last, and then how they are now. To know what those grade levels are, you'll go to the salary table, which is also in the back on page 308. And that shows you the salary tables for each of those grade levels. So you can see the minimum rate and the maximum rate, the minimum salary and maximum salary. GR salaries are for general government employees. GRP are police employees, or 40-hour a week typically. And And then GRF are firefighter employees who work crazy hours of like 2,748 hours a year or 2,904 hours a year. So you can see those different kinds of salary grades. In the back as well, under the appendix, we added a consolidated fee schedule, and you'll see that we made a lot of adjustments to fees. We hope that this is easy for you to discuss and read, and we would like to see you discuss this next week, or even we might even have some discussion tonight if we have some time on what these fees look like, how you're seeing them change, if you approve those changes, or if you want to see more changes. So you'll see, like on this page 316, you'll see that cremation was $25 and it's going up to $75 depending for that lower, smaller animal. And for a larger animal, it's changing from 125 to 150. So we've redlined it. So we hope that it's super easy for you to look at. And then in the back of your budget book, after the consolidated fee schedule, are the other funds. So does somebody have any questions? Thank you.
Sorry.
No, go right ahead.
How did you come up with these cremation fees and all the other fees? How did you set what you've got in here in green?
Thank you. That was provided by the departments themselves. So we've asked that they come as close to actual cost recovery as possible, and that they also weigh social benefit. So for instance, it might cost us more than $8 a year to issue animal license. However, there's a social benefit to having an animal license. So these were the recommendations of the department. And if we're not comfortable with those levels or what they are, we can go back to the department and ask them for further explanation.
Almost don't want to ask this because I
Thank
don't know
you.
if anybody has the answer. Disposal of dead animal versus cremation. I mean, seriously, what's the for $4? What are they doing with the animal?
Well, I think that there's a process to how they dispose of the animal, and that they aren't just allowed to just throw it in the garbage can, which is what happens typically when a resident just disposes of the animal. So
Melissa, Councilwoman Worthen, I don't know here, I'm not 100% sure, but in some cities, disposal of dead animal, it would allow them to cremate with multiple dead animals, for example. So they do one cremation with lots versus an individual private cremation.
Gotcha. Okay. Just kind of curious.
anyone else have any questions about the budget book, I'd be happy to meet with all of you individually about understanding the budget book if you don't understand it. But we hope that we've laid it out, because we really were looking to allowing a resident who isn't involved in the city at a regular basis to look at this budget book and understand, okay, well, what does that mean? Or what does this department do? We've put some performance measures in the budget book. I hope that you've noticed that the blocks of performance measures, we'll go to one here on the screen. Justice Courts did a good job of putting them together. So you'll see that there's some narrative as to what the department's purpose is. And then if there was something that they wanted to call out, whether it was a workload measure or a performance measure, or for the courts, they wanted to call out the revenue policy, because this is something that gets misunderstood all the time. You hear it all the time, I'm sure, that police officers are just out there to get more revenue for the city with speed traps. Well, that's not how we're allowed to operate, and that revenue policy clearly states that. But you can see there's workload and performance measures, and they actually had numbers from prior years because they have to report these regularly to the AOC. So they were able to easily start their performance measures. Many other places, like the police department, are starting performance measures. So you can see that they have some performance measures about how they want to impact the community, and they're going to come up with some ways to measure that. So we hope that that's added value to our budget book as well. Any questions about this section? Excuse me. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the budget book for a moment, and we're going to go on to the next section of this. So Everyone see this next one, financial health and key indicators? No? Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Police department.
Okay, thank you. Try one more time. Yes? Okay. Corbin's a good head nodder because he has no hair. So the light comes down. All right. So here's what I want to do.
That's mean.
That was mean, sorry.
Sorry, I came in late on that one. But that was good. It was good.
The glare just flashes yes or no, right?
Yes.
He laughed about it, so I figured I could too.
All right. I wanted to spend a few minutes on these because I have received a lot of questions, whether it's from the media, whether it's from council members, whether it's from residents, whether it's from my peers, about why are you having to react in the way that you're having to react to this pandemic? And other cities are saying, well, we're going to ride it out, or well, we can use reserves, or well, we have something available for us. So we're going to show you, I took 10 different cities, some cities I worked for, some cities that are all our same size, some cities that are similar in the services they provide to us. And we're going to look at them together and show you the difference between our city and how it had been run in the past, and how we compare to other cities, and maybe how they've ridden out some of this a little better than we have at this point. So on this city comparison chart, you'll see that the top line is population. So you can see Salt Lake City has 200,000 people, West Valley is 136, Provo is 116,702. We were smack right behind Provo. These are populations based on our sales tax distribution. I think that when the census comes out, we're going to overrun Provo, but we'll see whether we're the third or the fourth largest city in the state. But we are right now the fourth largest city in the state. The next line is revenue. So all of these are actual numbers from 2000 through June 2019. Wanted to give you something that actually happened, not budgets, because sometimes budgets don't look the same as what actually happened. You can see Salt Lake City brings in $322 million a year. And West Valley is almost $89 million a year. And Provo's at $70.3 million a year. We were at $54.4 million a year with a population similar to Provo and a population significantly less than Orem, and yet Orem's revenue stream was $60 million. Then the next section is expense. And the best part about CAFRs is that everybody has to put their expenses in the same category. So you can start comparing the same kind of apples to apples. You can see consistently, general government or administration looks like it was about 16, 17%, which is consistent with our city, except for West Valley. They spent about 24% of their revenue on general government. And then public safety, when you look at that, it's typically somewhere between 38% and 45%. Our city spent 60% on public safety. So 60% of our revenue stream was spent on public safety. The message is not that we've spent too much on public safety. The message is that the level of services that we're providing to our revenue stream is not level with what other cities' revenue streams are.
So when you're saying public safety, you're talking police and fire.
Correct. Yep. Public improvements. And I only chose cities that were not part of UFA or UPD or whatever law enforcement area they're now adopting, because we can't compare apples to apples there, right? If they've pushed their tax over and their expense over to some other entity, it would be difficult for us to compare. Public improvements are kind of a little bit all over the place. They're somewhere between 8 and 15%, but we were right in line with that. Development services were right in line with that. Some cities maintain parks, some don't, or may have a special revenue fund that does that. But the bottom line, that green line, that's what I want you to look at. Revenue less expense. Most of the cities are spending less than 90% of their budget, or I'm sorry, not budget, revenue, of their real revenue. We were spending 99.6% of our real revenue. That money that you see, that $12.5 million that West Valley has, that was able to go to capital. So they could maintain their roads and their parks and their buildings and all of the things that you need for one-time expenses, and they could continue to sustain reserves in other places. Many of them have healthy risk management funds. They have healthy IT funds. They have healthy fleet management funds. They have healthy leave balance funds, or they have very, very healthy capital project funds. So all of that money is going to those other funds, building up some reserves. And then when there's a rainy day, they can say, well, we're going to let those continue to sustain themselves and not contribute this year to those. And we'll let that revenue come back into our general fund, and we don't have to make further cuts. These are the cities that are most like us, but I did some more cities as well. So you can see I did Sandy City and South Jordan, Murray, Draper, and South Salt Lake. I recognize that their population isn't similar to ours, but look at the expenses. They're so similar to exactly the same revenue and expenditure mix that were those other 5 cities that were larger. It's really how a good business runs, that you run under 90% of your actual revenues. Draper, where I was, they called me and they're like, what's going on? Are you okay? I'm like, fine. And I said, you know, how are you guys weathering the storm? And he's like, oh, we're fine. They are fine. They've got $9 million extra a year out of a $40 million budget. They had 25% in excess of their revenue that they were able to put away to reserves. He said, we have large capital project funds and we're going to be fine. So when you're getting asked all the time, why is why is West Jordan having to lay off employees, or why are you having to make such huge budget cuts? This is the reason. We had nothing left in our tank. We had not increased revenues to a place that sustains the expense. Anybody have any comments or questions? Kayleen?
Denise, did you happen to look at what their property tax rates were?
I did. That's coming up here. You always like right ahead of me. I love it.
Okay, thank you.
And Denise, is that, in your opinion, well, you know, kind of a loaded question, sorry, but is that kind of a political idea of kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit? We don't want to raise fees or taxes, but other cities are doing that.
Yeah.
So what I guess, you know, historically it's more political, I guess, as to why we haven't raised fees or taxes or to get more revenue to keep in line with our expenses.
We did raise taxes and fees.
You did raise taxes and fees, but you raised expense at the same place, at the same level, but you did, you used that exact revenue for public safety, which was exactly what you'd promised the taxpayers to do. The challenge is that you were not provided, I don't think, a lot of information about where you were at the time.
Okay, and that was my question. Thank you. Yes, because obviously things have increased, but other cities are doing it a different way, and they're able to ride out the storm, as you mentioned. So I guess you're probably going to get to it, but where is the disconnect? You know, we're seeing the numbers, but where's the disconnect of what we're doing versus what other more fiscally solvent cities are doing in this similar situation?
Sure. So we're going to get there. Thank you. So you can see this is kind of a chart or picture version of what that information on the previous 2 screens looked like, kind of in summary form. So the blue line, or the first part, is how much of their actual revenue was spent on expenses. And then the dark green line is how much did they have that they could push over into reserves or capital somewhere else. And you can see we just had, you know, hardly anything, just 0.36%. And I'll provide you with these slides after tonight so that you can kind of look at them. I think they're going to be good for you for discussions, especially as we open things up a lot more for discussion on next week's session as we listen to you. So some of the other KPIs I wanted to kind of share with you because it does tell the story, or the rest of the story, Councilman Pack, as to what's our challenge, right? Is it our tax rate? Is it, I don't know. I just think it was just a lack of information more than anything. So I'm hoping that we're giving you good information and that you can make good, solid decisions based on that information. So the first thing that I was trying to think about, what's the story here? Why is it like this? So one of the things that we look at when we look at a city is what's their taxable value and where do they land with other cities? But one of the measurements is by lane mile, because lane miles tell you how has that city been developed, right? Is it a high bedroom residential community? Is it got a lot of arterials? Because lane miles mean a lot of maintenance, right? They mean snow plowing, they mean road maintenance, they mean population, they mean all kinds of things. So it's a good measurement tool. You can see that we have the third largest lane miles of anyone in the state. So we've got a lot of lane miles, second to West Valley and Salt Lake City. But when you put our taxable value, so what the property tax revenue comes in at, to those lane miles, you can see that we're second lowest as far as our value by lane mile. How much is taxable? Property tax is based on that taxable value. Does that make some sense right there? Okay.
Does the airport runway count as lane mile?
That's a good, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
And then
some of that
Yes,
tax exempt
Chris.
property.
Yes, Chris, but Salt Lake gets those miles.
thank you, Chad. Also, I saw Chief Maxfield had his hand raised earlier. I want to make sure before we get too far, he had an opportunity to chime in or ask a question if he had something and that wasn't just a slip of the mouse. Chief, I bumped you up to panelist, so if you do have something, you just have to unmute.
That was just a slip.
Okay.
Okay, so
No worries.
Denise, then does part of this, I don't know what the percentage of other cities of non-property tax properties are in other cities. Ours, I believe, is around 25%. Is that playing into this?
It does play into this, and we'll talk about that. It plays significantly as I threw Orem and Provo in there because they have significant portions of their city that are BYU and UVU, right? So it doesn't become good for their taxable value. Their taxable value is actually significantly lower than it would be if they had that land or value in there. In fact, it's greater than 25%. Murray's at 35% of their land is actually tax exempt. So they're second to Logan, which has over 40% of its land that's tax exempt. So it does play somewhat into it, but it isn't significant for West Jordan in that we're under 30%. Now let's look at that taxable value. So same taxable values, right? That doesn't change compared to our actual square miles. So what's the square mile footage of our city? One of the things that skews this is a little bit is Draper, because Draper has all of that huge mountain that's not able to even be occupied, but Draper's still on this. So you can see the two lowest value by square miles are Provo and Draper because a significant piece of theirs is just not developable or not taxable. But you can see again that we're the third lowest, and again, right next to West Valley. So we're really close to West Valley. They tend to be really significantly close to us on all of these KPIs. Now, what's our taxable value by person, right? So here's our population. And again, you can see Orem and Provo are down there because again, they're skewed because their value is so low. But West Valley and West Jordan are right in line with each other. And the next closest city is Sandy. And look at that huge jump there. It's just a really significant jump. Now here's property tax rates for those same cities. You can see I put Salt Lake City, West Valley, and West Jordan and Sandy together because those are those population distributors. So this is all of Salt Lake County cities because I needed you to see at the end there with the ones and twos, those are the ones that have are using UFA or Riverton Law Enforcement Area or Harriman Law Enforcement Area or UPD or someone. So I added all their tax rates together because you need to look at apples to apples, right? Where is our tax rate versus everyone else? So when Harriman says, well, we have a low tax rate, yeah, you have a low tax rate, but you also have UFA's tax rate, and you also have, you know, a law enforcement tax rate. So that's important in understanding the headroom that you have when you adopt a property tax rate. But it's more important for us to see that West Valley is so similar to us in all of our performance indicators and in what they're trying to maintain as a city. And yet they are significantly higher in their property tax rate, yet their taxable value is super similar to ours, which is why they're able to weather the storm a little stronger. Okay, so do you have any questions about those KPIs? I hope I ran through those as quickly as possible. I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but I think that question you're getting asked a lot, I'm getting asked a lot, and I hope that this gives you some, I guess, some understanding, maybe not so much an explanation that you might want to share with everybody, but more about why are we where we are. And I think that's really important for us to understand our starting point, and then for you to have a vision going forward. Any comments or questions?
Just one comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't know if this is working. So in our budget, you've taken out the 3 million or so that we're going to lose from taxes. On those other budgets that you put together, did you take out the 3 million they're going to lose, or did you just go off of their numbers?
Actually, Councilmember Lamb, those are all actual numbers from 2019. So
Okay.
They were audited numbers. I
Awesome.
try to stay away from budget because of that exact thing, that we're all kind of just guessing.
Right. Okay. Good to know. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So next on the agenda, where are we? Understanding the budgetary goals of the City Council. So the proposed budget gap, right? There was a big gap in the budget when we started on March 30th, was like the rainy day. So we knew that we had a $9.1 million-ish gap there, and we weren't sure how we were going to fill it. And so the executive team and the mayor went to work, and this is how we filled that gap. And we've talked about it a lot, right? We filled 24% of that gap with the 5% transfer from the utility funds. We did a reduction in force, which we're going to go through exactly what that looks like. We extended the life on police vehicles, and we kept the transportation sales tax funding into the streets department. So that expense reduction took out about 60% of the budget, or no, a little less, 44%, sorry. I was doing math really quick, 44%. And then reserves took out that 1/3. So it was kind of trying to be a balanced plan without impacting the residents. With all of it, we took a cut out first at 44%. 24% are going to be on the residents, and then the rest of the 33% was on reserves. That was the mayor's solution for how to fill that gap. But now the budget is yours. So you've accepted it. You'll be adopting it next week. So we want to understand maybe how you're feeling about how the mayor filled that gap and how this budget was presented to you. What do you want to do with that 5% revenue? Do you want to eliminate that transfer? We have put the notices out. I'm sure you've heard from residents. I've heard from many of them. My phone number was on it. But I didn't realize my phone number was on it, but my phone number was on it. We had to notice them because all residents had to receive that notice that we may have an intention of discussing this topic, and that we would have to have a public hearing on it, and that they had to be notified by June 3rd. We send utility bills out every 4 weeks, so I needed to get a jump on that quickly. So with the mayor handing you a budget that was going to be proposed and you accepting it with the transfer in it, we noticed the residents. Does not mean that you are forced to accept this transfer. Does not mean that you're forced to support the transfer. Does not mean that you have to stay with 5%. You have complete carte blanche to change this however you want. However you change it, we will notice the residents a second time after you've adopted the budget. They will get a second notice saying the budget has been adopted and this is what will actually occur. The first notice is notice of the public hearing and what our intention is. The second notice is this is what we have decided to do. Okay. So you can keep it, but at a lower percentage than 5%. You can keep it at 5%, or you can raise it to a higher percentage, and it will generate more general fund revenue and close that gap further that we're using reserves for. Does anyone want to? I mean, we can have lots of discussion next week, but if you want to discuss this tonight, we're certainly welcome to, I want to listen to you, and we want to respond and try and find those solutions. Councilmember Lamb.
So we're looking at moving money from the utility funds, which, we know that they were taken and put into these funds for the explicit use of water, sewer, et cetera. So why is it that I can transfer money from these accounts? Why can't we transfer money from the roads capital fund?
You can take money, well, because the roads capital fund is negative, but.
Well, not on this budget. On this budget, it looks like there's money.
No, that's grants money from the legislature. You should
Okay.
be negative.
It says there's 10 million.
Right, but look at it, 7.8 of that 10 million is grants money from the legislature. And impact fees are 5.7 of it. We can't transfer impact fees. We could transfer general capital, but it's negative $2.6 million. So here's why. That utility transfer is the one thing that's allowed under the state auditor's office because of the discrepancy between city-owned utilities and non-city-owned utilities. So some cities own their own water system, some cities don't. Some cities own their own sewer system, some cities have it with another entity, or cable or electricity, right? So we have a Murray City that sells their own electricity, Provo, Bountiful. They are able to say, we are going to transfer from that electric fund to the general fund because it is to the benefit of the taxpayers that own the right of way that utility is based on. So that's really the impetus for the state auditor to allow this transfer, is that in essence, it's a fee to the utility for the use of city-owned property by another entity. And in essence, the water fund and the stormwater fund and the solid waste are other entities. In case maybe, I know you've seen like in lots of other states too, solid waste or garbage is almost always a separate company as well. So it'd be as if it were a separate company. We would say, garbage trucks, you're using our streets to deliver your service. Therefore, a portion of your revenues are going to come back to us for the benefit of using our infrastructure.
So then my question would be, last year rates were increased because we were told that we needed to increase fees to cover costs. So now if I'm moving $1 million from water to the general fund, what's not going to get done next year?
And that's true. So one of the things that we've talked a lot about in the water fund is, first of all, that there's no increase in revenue this year. We changed the rates, which we'll talk about when we hit the water fund in a little bit. But the $1 million extra is not extra, so to speak, from the rate. What we did was, and I think we talked about this at length, we smoothed out the capital plan for water. So when that first water study was done with Raftellus, it was based on a capital plan that did not have smoothing in it, which was, okay, we are not going to spend more than $4 million a year on capital. It was, well, now we need 15 million, and now we need 13, and now we need 10, and now we need 4, and 2, and 3. And so it made the rate go really high and the demand, because we wanted to build everything all at once. As we've gone back to the drawing board, and I've done the rate study now, and I've recognized that some of the better practices that other cities put in to manage utilities, almost all of the utilities had that same thing. They were working in a bubble. Capital is working more in a bubble of, they weren't sure where we were financially. They were saying, this is what we need in capital. And sometimes you have to have those discussions where you say, well, I need you to work within this financial constraint in order to hold those rates low enough for our residents. So if you remember, Raftellus came back and said, you needed multiple years of water rate increases that were double digit. And we're coming back to you and saying, we believe that we can hold rates this year and that we can keep rates down by smoothing that capital plan to 2% a year based on the new rates that we've distributed to you. I think that it was unfortunate that Raf Tellis, you were in a bind. You didn't have a finance director at the time, and you also had this critical issue of your debt service ratio being in a bad place, and that you were falling under that debt service ratio. So you really had to respond quickly, and you really didn't have someone sitting in my seat at the time. So Raf Tellis, I think, did what they could with what they had, but I think that they needed more information. Anyone else have a question or comment? Okay.
So Denise, sorry.
Yes. No, thank you.
I'm not sure that really answered Chad's question.
Sure.
I don't know how he feels, but
What's not going to be done?
How do we answer that question for the residents when they say, wait a minute, you raised my water rates because you said you needed more money there, and now you're taking the money away?
I think that the answer is that we are smoothing out those capital projects. If you remember the capital project list before, it was a lot of water tanks now. We're going to do the airport water tank this year, and then we're going to evaluate what the demand really is.
Right, but I can't tell the average resident, well, before our finance director didn't know enough to be able to push back on our public works. So that's the real story, I believe, but I don't know how I convey that.
I know.
So it's basically the information, we made the best decision we could with the information we had. I guess now, because we have a new finance director, we can see that we found a better way. I don't know.
That would be my response, would be that you made the best decision you could in the circumstances that you were in, and you had to act quickly. You really didn't have a lot of choice.
Kayleen, Chad, you asked, what doesn't get done because of this? It does push out the timeline on some of those reservoirs, those water tanks on the far west side. It means they won't get done as early as we would have liked. They're going to be slower to get done because we got to save up more money for them and wait for the impact fees to pay for them. So if the development pressures want them to be done, the development has got to pay for them because the fund can't pay for them on a timeline that's keeping up with the development pressures.
Well, and actually from one perspective, and I've seen this and I've heard residents say that, is why are we paying for the expansion of all the new development? And so, if the new development needs new water tanks, and if the new development needs those kind of things, then the impact fees need to pay for that. And as we start to collect, we need to figure out how to balance it so that the impact fees, because we collect those more at the end than up front, but we may need to, I agree with that philosophy, is that the current residents of the city should not be the ones that are funding the expansion of the city when it does not benefit. To be honest with you, it doesn't benefit somebody that lives in my neighborhood on 13th, off of 13th West. It doesn't benefit anybody in my neighborhood to have a 4,000 unit development off of U111. How does that benefit them? And so from one perspective, if we're pushing off the development, or we're making the people who are responsible for the increases in the water use paying for the water, that's okay. The issue that I've heard is, well, you raised water rates 43%. now you're saying, hey, we're just going to take it for lack of, I mean, here's the, I guess this is the issue, is that 5% utility transfer, and I hate to use the word, but I'm going to say it, the 5% utility transfer is a tax.
Mhm.
And what we're doing is we're doing the same thing that all the residents pay for their utility franchise tax and their on Rocky Mountain Power, on Questar Gas, those kind of things. It's a 5%. It's a 5% utility transfer,
Actually 6%.
or whatever it is. But it's a utility transfer tax. And so in essence, and I in essence is what we've done. If we use, and because I'm still not 100% convinced, and we'd still have to come up with $2.8 million. But the utility transfer is really an increase in taxes to the residents, because we're not putting it back into the water fund. If we condition out the capital and money as the to cut the rates. So in all reality, we're using the conditioning as a way to raise revenue, and I think that's what's got some of the residents upset, is that in essence there's a, for lack of a better term, it is an increase in taxes that they're paying, because it's paying to the general fund, to the water rate, or the stormwater rate, or whatever that they were paying for. And so I think I think you're right. The council, when they raised the water rates, did not have good information. I think it was one of those decisions that there was not great information, and a decision had to be made hastily. And now, I don't want to say we got a windfall off of that, but now that we're figuring it out, there is some money there, and what's the best way to use it? And I agree with the concept of the utility transfer, because it does allow the non-property tax paying entities in the city to contribute to the services that non-property tax paying citizen or non-tax paying entity utilizes, with the roads and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, I mean, I guess what we're going to have to make as a decision is this 5% utility transfer diversification of the tax revenue? Is it better public policy to do a 5% utility transfer, or is it better to lower the water rates in essence by 5% and then figure out, and we know what we have to raise money, and that is, and sales tax is fixed. So then do we raise property taxes by and to cover the cost of a 5% utility transfer? That's plus or minus a 20% increase in property tax. So those are the questions that I think over the course of the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to have to answer and come to grips with, because I mean, I've heard 2 or 3 residents tell me that they thought that they were lied to about the water rates. And part of me says, well, when we raise water rates by 43%, and then we say we want to take 5%, I can't blame them for thinking that. Now, Unfortunately, I think this council has been put in a bad predicament in more than one way. And we're going to have to solve multiple issues that not only affect this year's budget, but next year's budget and the budget after that. And I have to tell you, looking at this year's budget, this year's budget is not the one we need to, what we're looking at is not just this budget, but it's the one next June that we really are working towards fixing. Because, you know, we can use a little bit of one-time revenue to say, okay, COVID messed us up. We can't use that excuse next June. We might be able to use it a little bit, but I don't think we can use it. I don't think we can use it again.
Well, COVID will be a factor in taxes next year. So I'm not saying you can use it again, but it is a factor next year.
Well, it will be a factor, but we have to figure out what I have to tell you. We can't, from my perspective, we can't continue to deficit spend. I'm going to tell you that I disagree with the mayor when he says this was a balanced budget, because a balanced budget wouldn't have used the rainy day fund for $3 million. So, you know, his perception of balanced budget and my perception of balanced budget are different. But when we're taking in $1 worth of tax revenue and we're spending $1.05, I think is the number. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, when we're taking in $1 and we're spending $1.05, we have either a spending issue or a revenue issue. And we've got to either fix it one of both ways. We either cut spending or we increase revenue. And this year is only the beginning to fix our budget, because next year, if we stay the way we are, we're still in the hole next year's budget when we start out. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, so our second loaded question is going to be, what do you want to do with the rainy day fund? Are you going to use 3.2 million of reserves, or are you going to use more of it? If you're going to cut the utility transfer, do you go more into reserves? Do you leave reserves as they are, or do you use less of reserves? We're kind of looking for that policy level direction on some of these questions, because if you're going to tell us, okay, I don't want to do the transfer, or I want the transfer at 3% or 2% or whatever that looks like, or 0, I don't agree with it. What is the solution? What, you know, how the mayor said, okay, 33% reserves, 44% expense, 24% revenue. We're kind of looking for some guidance from the council as to what that looks like from the council's perspective, because now this is their budget. So do they say, well, I'm okay using $5 million of reserves, or I'm okay using nothing in reserves? Now, mayor and administration go back and figure out a way to come back to us with nothing in reserves and either increase revenue or decrease expense. But we need to know what that direction looks like, so that we can go back to the table and say, okay, now what else could we do differently? So if you reduce the use of reserves to a lower amount, you know, is that by raising property tax revenues? Is that the solution? Do you feel like a tax is a tax is a tax, so we need to go back to property tax revenues? And if so, at what level, right? Is it to make up for the transfer, the utility transfer plus reserves? What does that look like to us? And what's the tolerance level there? Do you do that over 2 years? You know, I've always been a proponent of at least an inflationary property tax increase of between 3% and 5%. You know, do you do 10% this year and plan on 10% next year, or 5% next year, to kind of try to close that gap a little slower? Do you reduce the use of reserves to a lower amount by raising the utility transfer? It doesn't sound like that's a popular thing to do, but that's an option. In Bountiful and Murray, they do up to 10% of their utilities over to the general fund, especially based on that power utility. Do you reduce the use of reserves by cutting more expenses? We would need some direction there. There's not a whole lot. We're going to go through the general fund, but I'm not sure that there's a whole lot in there left to cut outside of public safety. And I've heard that that is an untouchable area, which is fine. And I know that's a focus of the council, but I'm not sure where else there would be to cut that kind of money.
Council, if I can chime in, one thing that's helpful to us is set the direction, set the policy, say what you want, and then let us come back and say, okay, here's what we suggest in terms of how to get there. If you want to direct cutting more, if that's your desire, tell us the direction, tell us the amount, and then let us come back with a proposal on how to do it. If you go through and just say, I think this line's too high, this line's too high, I think you could cut this, there can be a lot of unintended consequences or impacts out in the departments. I'd rather we ask the department heads, if you want to do cuts, we ask the department heads to bring us back feedback on that, so that they're proposing, if they have to cut further, here's how they could try to do it and minimize impacts, because they'll know best what will minimize the service impacts to the residents.
Well, with that, then I'm going to jump in. Denise and I went over the budget on Monday, and let me just tell you a couple of things that I think we need to look at. A couple of them will probably infuriate some people, but I think we need to look at them. Our office supply budget is bloated. There were a couple, so I'm going to suggest that we need to do the office supply budget at the verified amount that ended in June of 2019, and that we hold the line on that. And I'll tell you why. For example, and I'm going to single out the Justice Court on this one. Last year, the anticipated budget was $12,000, and next year they're $19,000. Why do we need a 30%, 50% jump in office supplies when we should be leveraging our technology and not being using so much paper? So my suggestion is, and Denise, I can't remember what the number was, but no, on the office supplies, we were talking, it was hold the line at the 2019 level. There are some memberships in organizations that we have in the budget that we need to drop. I think overall the number that can be dropped in memberships across the board. We don't need to be members of all these organizations. I mean, we need to be members of the ones that are critical, and we need to make some choices. We need to look at a uniform schedule. The uniforms and the uniform budget are all over the place. We need a uniform schedule on how often we replace uniforms and how we're doing that. The travel budget seems excessively high. And I think the number that we finally looked at to allow for some play in case we need to do further budget adjustments was a 25% cut in travel. We need to look at cutting the training budget by 10%. I will tell you that I was concerned at the police overtime budget. The standard overtime budget seemed jumped by about 40K. I can't remember. I don't remember, but the police overtime budget jumped substantially with what doesn't seem a justification, particularly since the police department is fully funded. We shouldn't, and almost fully staffed, we shouldn't need a whole lot of overtime. And the one that I know I'm getting to get in trouble for saying, but I'm wondering if we're getting $66,000 worth of benefit out of the City Arts Council. And I wonder if we're getting $11,000 worth of benefit out of the Healthy West Jordan Committee. And then last but not least, two unpopular things is that the council budget's got $150,000 in contingency. And I think that 150, I think 100 of that can go away. That's for an administrative assistant, and I think we're working through that right now. If we need to do something, we do that later. And last but not least, I am not a fan of spending $200,000 in ongoing revenue on a city website when we're laying off people. That 200K either has got to come out of one-time revenue for a city website, or it's got to, whether it's an IT fund or some other revenue pot. And my other editorial comment is that 200K for a website, to build a website, seems ridiculously high. I don't know what the RFPs are. I haven't seen them, but that seems a little high to when the costs of when the actual costs of a website are the hosting fee and domain names and some software licenses. 200,000 seems expensive. So there's my policy direct. And then last but not least, I think our fee schedule needs to be completely reworked. We have fees on there that have been charged that are the same amount that we were charging in pre-2006. The cost of providing that service since pre-2006 over 14 years has increased. And so off the top of my head, I'm thinking that anything pre-2006 probably ought to be raised by 15%. Anything between 2006 and 2010 ought to be raised 10%. Anything between 2010 and 2018 ought to be raised by 4 or 5%. And if they're not, and I'll caveat with that if they're not currently being adjusted in the schedule that we've been proposed. So I'm talking about also adjusted rates. You know, if it's like the dog license, okay, it's $8. If we raise that, and that was pre-2006, if I remember right, if we raise the dog license by 15%, talking about raising the dog license to $9.20. We still have the public policy thing about having a dog. Of course, it gets into the discussion, should we really even be in the dog licensing business? But that's a policy discussion for another day. But I don't think that we anywhere between 5 and 15% based on the inflationary costs is overly burdensome. And if that would raise overall on the fees budget another 5%, you know, another 5%, we're talking about $200,000. Some of the cuts that I've suggested up above were someplace in the neighborhood of 600K. So if we do that, we can shave at least $750,000 off the budget, and we haven't really missed anything. So there are my suggestions to where to start looking at the budget. I haven't touched personnel at all except for the police overtime. And like I said, that took a significant spike, and without a justification, I'm going to call it into question. So I think there's some places that we can deal with the budget, particularly when we're in a tight year. I think we have to scrutinize travel. We have to scrutinize office supplies. We have to scrutinize memberships. We have to scrutinize one-time expenditures for websites and those kind of things. And once we've decided that we've tightened our belt to the absolute bare minimum, I might entertain some other things. But at the end of the day, I would just as soon cut as much money as we can. If we can get down into the $2.5 million revenue range with reserves, we're going to, without talking about tax increases, and we don't do anything with the utility tax, or we raise taxes for the utility tax, something. But I think we need to get under the we need to be down around the $2.5 million range in reserves to make this work so that we're not killing our reserve fund. So there's where I'm at.
Yeah, we're going to go through the general fund pretty in depth by area. So I think that will help with some of Kelvin's discussions and some of his ideas. So hopefully it might clarify for some of the other council members what they might want to think about. So, you know, as you're going through this, do you want to raise property taxes or not? We're going to need to know that pretty quickly because there's a lot of steps that as administration on my end that I'm going to have to go through to get that ball rolling. If you do want to consider that, and that can be a discussion for next week as well. What do you want to do with general fund expenses? Do you want to leave the cuts as they've been proposed? Do you want to cut them further? And like Corbin said, if you could give us direction, if you can give the administration direction, I'm sorry, because I'm working for you now, but if we could give the administration direction and provide them with that policy of we are not willing to do this without doing that, that's really helpful. All right, let's go through, if you don't mind, on some of the general fund, just to kind of give you some glimpses as to how things changed in the general fund. We've gone over it high level. It's going to be a little closer to the ground because we've had a lot of questions. So I put administration together. And the reason I did that was because, and it was like the mayor's office, my office, utility billing, human resources, community engagement, events, and city recorder. I'm putting these numbers together because we have done so much reorganization and positions have moved from MySpace to community engagement and from city recorder to here and utility billing to the water fund. And it's very commingled for administration right now, just because we did a huge reorganization with the change in the form of government. So here's how they look as like a solid piece so that you can see really what was the impact of some of the changes. So you can see that I took personnel, operations, and allocated services. Allocated services is a percentage of the service that we provide to all the utility funds. And that would be for like utility billing, et cetera. We're going to talk about some of these in depth here in a moment, but you can see the first blue column on your right is tells you what is the proposed budget versus what we believe we're going to be spending by the end of this year, the estimate, okay? So you can see the proposed budget to estimate has dropped by $625,000 in personnel, and we'll go over what that means. Increased operations, okay, of $300,000. And then allocated services would have increased as well, or decreased, so to speak, by $145,000. So that's giving credit back to the utilities, and we'll tell you what that is here in a moment in detail. So for personnel, how did that drop from $625,000? Well, we eliminated these positions. We eliminated the deputy mayor's position, assistant CAO, the budget officer, a senior accountant, an accounting technician, the administrative assistant and human resources, and an events coordinator. All of those became unbudgeted in this next year. We transferred, this was a little odd to me. The water meter techs were budgeted in the general fund, and then they were allocated out to all of the enterprise funds. Well, they don't service the garbage fund, and they don't service the sewer fund or the stormwater fund. They only service water. So we transferred those positions to Public Works. They report to Public Works now, and they are budgeted out of the water fund, which is where they belonged in the first place. We transferred 4 customer service reps from my department to community engagement, and we retitled some of the positions to match the rules. So my title became Administrative Services Director because I became the Administrative Services umbrella. I held all the umbrella for administrative services versus just finance. You can see that those same positions I just showed as eliminated were reduced in the full-time employee count and which departments were affected. In operations, some of the changes that were made, this was another thing that I found as I've kind of fleshed things out and made sure that we're expensing things to the right place. All of the bank fees were being expensed to utility billing. So all the credit card fees for like developers, if they paid by check and we deposited it, we have to pay for that through the bank. All those banking fees were all just being allocated out to the utility accounts. They were never being paid for in the general fund. Well, a portion of our revenue is certainly general fund, and a portion of our banking is certainly general fund. So we brought a portion of those back. We brought $150,000 of the $350 we pay back into the general fund. So that increased expense to the general fund by about $150,000. We added to the general fund, as Councilmember Green mentioned, website and graphic design and management. This $50,000 would be ongoing expense to manage the website. We would need probably a full-time person if we wanted to hire someone to do all of the graphic design and website development that we need. But we really feel like we can get by with a new website with somebody that would be a consultant on the site if we had $50,000 to do that. It would be every year though, but it's less expensive than a full-time employee. We brought in a benefits broker and some other HR services that are technology related versus manually done. That increased cost by $50,000, but they cut a full-time position out to do that. And then public outreach, the budget for that was increased by $50,000. We've never really done a lot of public outreach. It's always been budgeted at this level, but never spent. We believe that we have a lot of work to do on your behalf, and that this budget could be used to do that. And because those banking fees were allocated out to enterprise funds already, that allocation changed. So that's why that $150,000 in allocations. Are there any questions about administration or why those costs changed, or that you think there should be additional cuts in this area for anything that you have a comment on? We cut a lot of administration. The council office budget, I just wanted to clarify where that was. Council members and all of you and the council office director were budgeted at the level that was approved in last year's budget. So the council office director was budgeted at $110,000. It's not what you're paying your interim right now, but it's what you had approved previously for that position. So we budgeted it at what it was market adjusted to. You can change that as you see fit. And then when Councilmember or Chairman McConaughey and I spoke, he said, let's just throw all of the rest of the funding into contingency, and then we can have a council discussion on what's appropriate. Whether you want to fund an administrative assistant or not out of that contingency, whether you want to keep that contingency that high in case you need legal representation or have some sort of professional technical services you want. But I should also remind you that you also have control over the budget. So should you want legal representation at any time, you can instruct me to open the budget, and we can have a budget opening within 2 weeks and you can fund legal counsel. So it's not like you're so restricted that you should pad that budget so that just in case anything happens, you own that budget. That's your budget. You can do what you want to do and what you need to do with it, and you can open it if you need to. So that's why that council contingency is so high and why it looks the way it does. It is only to spark conversation as to how you want that used and whether you want it at that level or not. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that one? Everybody's muted. Okay, moving on. I guess I should do the Councilman McConaughey count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? All right, so public safety. I combined police and fire because it's good to see it as a big picture. You can see that personnel costs to our estimate this year dropped substantially as well. We had a lot of senior firefighters, mostly firefighters, but some senior police officers as well retire, not just with the volunteer retirement option, but just naturally throughout the year. It's kind of where our life cycle is. And so when they retire, we get to hire new officers, and it kind of brings those salaries down again, and then they start building back up. So that's why that's reduced. It isn't that we cut any service officers. We did do some cuts in public safety as far as support goes, and we'll go over those here in a moment. Overtime did increase from what our estimate is for this year, and from what 2019 is. Some of that has to do with FSLA for the firefighters, but that's not the increase. Most of it has to do with police overtime. However, Chief Wallentyne strongly recommends that we fund that overtime for the cases that do come up that require officers to stay and perform services late. So he's strongly requested that his overtime budget be respected, but again, that is the council's decision. Operations were decreased in both police and fire, and fleet substantially gave us savings as well as we transitioned from the 3-year police vehicle rotation to a 5-year. So we're saving about $345,000 this year alone in that.
So I do have a quick question on that one, Denise.
Yeah.
With the change to the life of the vehicles, I know that there were some really significant penalties if we were to move away from the lease. But changing the life, that doesn't have any negative.
No, we did a
impact.
transition plan so that this year, the leased vehicles that are on their 3rd year this year, we are going to buy them out. So we'll buy that lease out. There's no penalty for doing that. It'd be just as if we'd taken it to market. There's a residual, right? We're going to leave the other 2 leases in place. They have given us the option of buying them out at the residual value, but we prefer to just keep them in place as we transition. So this first year, we'll have $350,000 in savings of transitioning the 2018 replacements into 2 more years. And then as we go to the next year, we should see about $500,000 in savings.
Cool. Thank you.
We're paying absolutely no penalties.
Denise, may I please ask a question regarding overtime? And of course, this might be more appropriately asked to Chief Wallenstein. When overtime is budgeted at approximately $1 million, give or take from year to year, understandably, there'd still be overtime necessitated, but if some of that money were allocated into hiring full-time personnel, I'm wondering where that balance would be if you're getting personnel full-time versus overworking overtime, and then you have more personnel patrolling and on the streets. I'm sure that this budget has the sweet spot there with Chief Wallenstein's best input. Just from my understanding, that would be something good to know.
And you're right. I think Chief Wallenstein's gotten online, so that's good. But in a business world, you're right. I've come from that business perspective too, right? Where you're going, all right, when is it best to hire an employee versus paying overtime? Typically police, first of all, half of this is police overtime and the other half is fire overtime. They're about half and half. It's about $500,000 each. But police overtime typically is unavoidable. It's typically not to cover a shift if an officer's missing. It's typically used to cover suicides and they need to stay on the scene for long periods of time. The murder investigation for the Butterfields, the officers were on scene for hours and hours. And so because you have an officer doing an investigation and writing the report, they don't get to go home at the end of the shift. And it's difficult with the way the shifts are managed for them to be able to say, oh, come in, like in my staff, right? I could say, oh, come in late, don't worry about it. Or if I were running retail, I would say, okay, well, I'm going to extend the hours of this part-timer to cover your shift. But that's not the way public safety works. So his overtime is typically used for some training opportunities where they may have to continue to work their shifts and also come in for additional training, but also to cover those investigations or those assignments that might go beyond their shift.
Great.
So
Do you want to speak to that?
I wanted to just jump in here. So, and here's why I wasn't a fan of the increase in overtime. In the actuals in FY 18-19 were 308. Last year we budgeted 367 and the estimated actual is 296. It'll probably come in at 300. So if you look at the actuals from FY 18, the last FY plus this FY, the average is right around 300. This year, the overtime, and again, we can let the chief jump in, went to 378. That's a 25% overtime. And that's where my concern came in. I don't have a problem funding the overtime. What I'm wondering is based on the actual overtime. And by the way, when you look at all the other overtime budgets, they're pretty close to what they've been the last couple of years. This one seems to be the outlier. And I don't want to sound like I'm picking on public safety, but that, that's a you know, over this year, that's a 70K, that's a 70K jump, that's 25%. And I think, you know, at least it deserves some scrutiny. So that's why I raised the issue.
And just a quick heads up, we have both the police chief and the fire chief on the call. I did set it up so that if they'd like to speak, they can unmute their lines to do so. But we can also hold the more detailed conversation to next week, unless it's needed today. But we can give them time to be prepared to speak to that next week if they'd like a little bit more time to prepare, pull information together, and really fully address the council concern.
Well,
without
I think that
concern
would,
for time.
I think that would be the best anyways, to give them a week to take a look at this, as we've talked about that. So no, I think you're right.
Thank you.
I'm sure both chiefs could actually jump in right now and give us plenty of information, but I'm looking at the clock and realizing this is an extra meeting on an extra weeknight. So having them go in conjunction with everybody else next week might work a little bit better for flow.
Great. Thank you. All right, so these are the positions that were eliminated out of police and fire. They're all support positions. None of the service or first responders were affected by the reduction in force that's occurred. So you can see those positions. And then again, just a note that reminded you that we did have quite a few retirements that also saved us some money as well. Public safety overtime. It is less than the fiscal year 2020 budget, but to council members' point, it has not been spent in its entirety for several years. It's budgeted to possible demand, and actual is usually a savings. So it's something similar to professional and technical. Sometimes you say, well, what if we need a study kind of thing? Operations are budgeted at a savings for all of public safety, which is a lot. We've moved the leases to the purchase plans and the useful life from 3 years to 5 years. And like I said before, $345,000 the first year and $500,000 the second and third and fourth year. Public Works, really quick, what happened with them? They have a savings to estimate of about almost $800,000 in all. Their operations increased, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And their allocated services increased as well. And what I mean by increase is we're not allocating as much out to the utilities or to the capital funds. This one isn't the utilities. This is where a lot of the engineers were actually being allocated out to the capital funds and drawing down ongoing expense with one-time monies, right? A capital project is a one-time money. We shouldn't be costing out engineers there. We've run out of the one-time money, and the engineer still needs to be paid and still has a job to do. So the positions that were eliminated, there were 8 positions eliminated, and half of the parks seasonal budget was reduced. This is going to take a lot from the Parks Department, but that's what was reduced in Public Works personnel. Operations increased because Esri and other GIS software costs increased substantially. We've had some maintenance and supply costs. Obviously, when you open up a new Public Works building, there's some different needs there for supplies. But more than that, we've increased our other facility costs. As you know, the Justice Center is aging and City Hall is aging, and there's been some increased maintenance needs there as well, especially with the HVAC systems. Allocated services, as I spoke about just a minute ago, they were budgeted in the wrong place. We shouldn't have been allocating to our one-time money capital funds with staff. So we pulled that back. That's not a practice that we should be having done. Community development, this is Scott Langford's area. It's development services, building, engineering, property administration, and community preservation, business licensing. They had a slight increase, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, in all of the areas. Again, though, the allocated services has a lot to do with engineers that are in his department that were being allocated out to capital projects. He eliminated 3 positions, the development coordinator, the CDBG grants coordinator, and the property administrator. So there's 3 FTEs out of his department. And he did have a position transferred into his department to engineering from GIS. And that, I'm sorry, and that explained the increase in wage, right? So he got one position, so he would have actually had savings from those 3 other positions, but because he got a position in, it decreased the savings there. The city attorney's office had a decreased personnel budget as well. They gave up 1 full-time position and did show an increased operational budget. So we'll go over that here in a moment. They decreased or they eliminated the legal executive assistant. It was a vacant position. That was a longtime employee that retired. And the increase is all in professional and technical services. So when you see operations increase, it's all there. That's for the needs that Rob has for his department for outsourcing some of the specific legal reviews and peer reviews for like land use and those kinds of things. So Jody Burnett and some of those others that are working on our behalf. Economic development. Actually, this is a hard budget to really read and to get a story off of because the economic development director job has been vacant for so long, but yet we keep funding it, unfunding it, and moving it all over. So we want you to know the economic development director is fully funded in this budget that we're presenting to you, that we have an economic development program that's fully funded that's presented to you, and also that we've reduced 1 position out of this department and moved the RDA program manager over to my department, and we're using him as a senior management analyst. So he's taking on RDA program management as well as a few of the duties from the staff that that were eliminated as well. He's doing some grants and contracts management and some of the stuff that the accounting technician was doing as well. This is the Justice Court budget. They have eliminated 1 position. They eliminated 1 judicial assistant position, and there were no other really significant changes there otherwise. All right, are there any questions about the general fund or comments? Okay. We're doing okay on time, I'm glad. I was worried. All right, the other funds, we're just gonna kind of quickly go through these, just kind of give you some high level on them. The Class C Road Fund, this is a new fund that's on its own now. So all of our Class C road funds that are distributed to us will go into this fund and will be exclusively used for road maintenance. It's dedicated to that. Those funds are actually based on fuel sales. So when fuel sales are dropped, we will see our Class C road funds drop as well. It's distributed on a formula of population and weighted miles. So it's kind of similar to sales tax, right? So we do get more Class C road funds than a lot of places because we have double. We have a good portion of the state population, and we also have the 3rd largest lane miles. We have 3.67% of the state's population, and we've seen this before because when I gave you those KPIs, 1,635 weighted miles or lane miles. We receive approximately $4 million a year right now. We're hoping that that sustains itself as people stopped driving in April, but we'll see. And we're spending this year $4.7 million. So we're bringing that balance down in that fund to $87,800. So it's gonna have, that's what you're really regularly gonna see with Class C roads. Gonna bring the money in and you're gonna spend it all on road maintenance pretty typically on that next year.
Denise, that was my question. I wanted to kind of ask that if when is money collected at, say, the pump versus allocated to the city? In other words, is April's mileage going to be reflected in the 2021 budget? Or how does that, what's the time lag? How does that work?
It lags by 60 days, 60 to 90 days. It's similar to sales tax. And it actually comes through UDOT, but through the state tax commission as well.
Love
the state
that.
tax
Okay.
commission gives it to UDOT, so that's a 60-day delay, and then UDOT gives it to us, which is about a 30-day delay. So it's about 90 days behind. Okay, good question.
So just to make sure I understand that right, miles driven that will reflect on the next year's budget, which goes from July to June, actually are driven from April to March?
No, because we actually accrue it, so we don't close our books until we've received that June distribution.
Okay, so stopping being around the bush, the decrease in miles for April, will that
Will be in
reflect on the current
Yeah,
year
this-
budget or on the next year budget?
This year.
Okay, thank you.
Highlands Special District. I need some input on this. Corbin, help me on this one. This is, yeah, you start.
I'll just say the bad news. This special service district was not set up very well. We need to restructure it. It does not collect enough in revenue to pay for the services that have been promised to the service district. Right now, we have a really tough decision. We have to either subsidize this service district contract with general fund money or raise the rates on the special service district. Perhaps a little bit of both. Long term, we need to restructure this and we'll have to bring that back to the council, but that's not something we can accomplish before this new fiscal year. I want to take a closer look at how, not only how it's structured and governed, but also the services that are being provided by this service district fee. But we don't have time to deal with that prior to the adoption of the
This is one to be careful of, by the way.
Yes.
I heard, just because most of the residents in the Highlands are going to be the homeowners that were initial homeowners. This isn't several generations old. This is a relatively new thing, so it's going to be tricky.
Right, correct.
It also has a lot of new ones. Isn't the Garbett district in here? Because I've had phone calls from people.
Oh yeah, it's not even completely developed yet.
Mhm.
We need to change the structure so that the fee is applied better across all the properties within the district boundaries. Right now, it's not being applied very well. We need to, we can go back and look at some of the original governing documents, and the council has the authority to adjust some things, but not everything, but many things that will help its long-term structure. But all of that will take a little bit of time, and there's quite a process to go through that.
So this Highland Special District fee schedule is on page 189 right now. Each resident, single family or multifamily by unit, pays $15 a month on their utility bill to the Highland Special District. But that's not enough for us to sustain the services. So right now the fund balance is negative and we received an audit write-up last year. So in order to keep it solvent, I would need to increase the fee to $19 a month per residence, or the council may choose to subsidize the service in this area. I just kind of need to know some direction, whether you want to increase that fee. So when you adopt this budget right now, there's a fee increase in there. But if you choose to say, we're just going to keep it at $15 a month, then you would be giving me permission to subsidize it, and I would be transferring from the general fund to the Highlands Special District.
So we're going to take from one fund where we have no money to give money to a fund that has no money.
Yeah.
I'm going to need a lot of more information on this. I need history, like snow removal services, special district, or why?
It's hard
Like,
to understand.
you know, I feel we need a lot more information to give you any input, because when I look at it, I say, okay, if they've got special landscaping, yeah, they should pay for that. But snow removal, don't the rest of the taxes like the rest of us pay? Why would they not pay for that?
Isn't that snow removal of the sidewalks out there?
It's
Again, that's something that's done citywide though.
there's some added snow removal on specific pieces that are dedicated by the district. This is probably one we need to carve out a half an hour to just discuss this issue at one of the next budget work sessions. Bring Brian in and Dave Naylor possibly to help explain a little bit what the services are included in the contract. We contract out all the services for the special service district, but we're not doing we're not providing extra services beyond what the original documents, the original service district was requiring. We want to scrutinize that, but it's one that the council should spend a little bit of time on specifically, and we can prepare for that. But this one's going to need some help. It's in trouble.
This one was done
I-
during Rick Davis's time, right?
No, it was since then.
I
Maybe
also,
during Bryce Hatterley's.
Bryce Hatterley was the city manager, when it was, or the interim city manager when it was created, correct?
I will need to know, like, if I buy a home in there, do I know about this? When I built my home in there, did I know about this extra fee? I
Nope.
need to know those kind of things.
I get the calls all the time. I'm getting them from the Garbett home owners. They're like, what is this? And I explain it and they're like, why wasn't I told about this? So no, they're not getting the disclosure.
Okay, thank you.
Can real estate agents be fined for that? I mean, please.
I don't know, but.
Or
all
just forward the bill to them.
right. All right, so with some other special revenue funds, I'm just going to mention, we have the Community Development Block Grant Fund. It lists all of the entities that we will be hearing from at the public hearing on June 10th when you approve the acceptance of the Community Development Block Grant from the feds, from HUD. So it's required that we do a public hearing. It's specific to CDBG. We do it every year. But that will really outline their budget for you. So I'm not really going to go into much detail for you there. And then the Craft Made Special District, that's actually owned by the city. It would have been reimbursement to Craft Made Development if they had stayed in business there for some improvements that went on in the area. But because they left the area and abandoned that, then that becomes property of the city. So we do have some money in it, but it is dedicated to improvements that are either have a nexus, direct nexus or benefit to that area, or are actually in that area. And there's some ideas there for some future capital projects. So we're just kind of keeping that money just sitting there for now.
So I've got a question on this one because there's 600K in the fund. Wouldn't this be better to, it just seems to me that this is kind of like this lingering something over our heads. Wouldn't it be better to figure out the 600K in improvement projects in that district and expend the money and eliminate this district so that we have
Yes.
less headache?
And we will do that. We are going to probably propose a capital project, not this next fiscal year, the next one, because we have 2 more reimbursements for this area that will come in and add to that. So it should end at about $1.1 million at the end of the day. And then we'll have a capital project that'll be about 1.1 million.
And Kelvin, we have some capital project needs out there. So this is really good money to have to be able to do some of those things out there.
Okay, I just want to make, it just seems like it's one of those things that's hanging out there.
Yeah,
And it's like, can we get rid of this and make our lives simpler?
yes,
It's okay buying
please.
us a little bit of time. I'd like to simplify it too, but as it buys us a little bit of time, it lets us see whether we should use this money for a capital project relating to roads or relating to wastewater or relating to water infrastructure in the area. We don't know that yet. And part of that will depend on the way some of the land in the surrounding areas that is developed. So this is actually a good one to sit on for a couple more years while we see what proposals from land users are coming in.
All right, the other ones that I'm just going to mention that you've already received their separate budgets is the Fairway Estates Special Service Recreation District. That one pretty much sustains itself and it has quite a decent reserve in there, but it would really be a mess to play with that tax. So I would leave it there and then leave that 50,000 in there to just hold. It's just been holding the balance for years and years. The Municipal Building Authority and the Redevelopment Agency. There haven't been a ton of changes in those budgets, so there's not a lot to discuss. But I just want you to make sure that you're aware of those. All right, internal service funds.
Wait a minute, I couldn't click on my button fast enough.
Oh, sorry, I should have counted, see?
Yeah, well, I'm not fast enough with my mouse. just one thing that I'm wondering if we could take a look at with the number two, when it's the industrial park. I know there's a slight fund balance there. But what I'm wondering is if the staff will take a look at this, because this particular area is right on the industrial park. There is a section of road on the west side of the road that runs between, I think the company's called Datus and Integrity Auto on the corner. Alan's saying my mic's cutting in and out. I wonder what's going on. But there's a section in front of two businesses that does not have a sidewalk on it, and the other side of the road doesn't have a sidewalk at all. So what we're doing is we're forcing pedestrians into the street if they're trying to walk between 7800 South and farther south. And it's right in the RDA area. I'm wondering if that's just, Corbin, if that's something that we can't take a look at. I don't know what it'd cost. I don't know what cost per linear foot of a sidewalk is or how that works, but it was just, as I read that budget and I saw there was a little bit of money there, I'm wondering if there's something that we couldn't do to connect the sidewalk so we don't have, that's the only piece of sidewalk along the entire 13th West that does not have a sidewalk, and it does make it dangerous, and it's weird there the way it looks. And if we want to improve the area, that's just an idea. Not that we have to do it, but anyway, it was just a thought as we're talking about that.
Let's you and I talk offline about that.
Okay. All right, so the internal service funds, these are funds that should be self-sustaining. They should have some good reserves in them because this is meant to be somewhere that you kind of hold money until you have a big project or something. And these typically have reserves. So the fleet management fund, this year we're using fund balance from the fleet management fund. It had a healthy fund balance, thankfully, because it's helping us transition from that lease to purchase plan. So in essence, the fleet management fund is going to buy those lease residuals, and then they will, then it will expend it back to the general fund over 3 years. So if it didn't have that fund balance in it, it would have been almost impossible for me to make this transition to allow savings in the general fund. So it's a really good thing that we built that fleet management fund up. We want to talk, or typically you've been given an exact list of every vehicle that could be replaced, and that limits the fleet manager's ability to replace the vehicles. I would rather see us say, I guess, advise you to set that policy level where you're saying we're going to set a limit or a boundary around what you would use as a replacement fund, and not have an exact list, because then you're working on lists. Sometimes you're just replacing to replace instead of replacing by need. I know that he uses a point schedule, and it depends on maintenance and miles and those kinds of things, but there are times when a vehicle unexpectedly needs to be replaced. And when we have an exact list with these VINs, and those are the only ones you can replace, it's really difficult for fleet manager to say, hey, I got to replace that one and not that one, versus having a smoothed out or conditioned expense from which he can pull from and make sure that we maintain that service level. So we start measuring things like how often are vehicles needing a maintenance, or how often are they on the road? And then that becomes that service level for fleet versus just, did you replace all these things on this list? We trust the professional to make those replacements as in a responsible level. There's no other changes to fleet management, but that would just be a recommendation. I think that's a good discussion for next week with you on policy level for fleet management. Now, the IT technology fund also had a decent fund balance, and it wasn't huge. It was about $1.1 million. but it's going to allow us now to do some of the technology changes that we have been talking about. IT used to be split. So it used to be operations and staffing was in the general fund. And then we have this technology fund over here. That really doesn't make a lot of sense. Just like fleet, the fleet guys are over here, their operations are over here, and the fleet replacements over here. We're doing the same thing with IT. Pulled them out of the general fund and said, we're putting them in an IT fund. And then we allocate from the general fund, or we pay for technology in the IT fund. So some of the things we're asking for this year, so you're going to see that budget changed a little bit, but is new permitting software for our development services. And that is a $500,000 project, and that's one that we think that would be eligible for some of the CARES Act funding for reimbursement. So in essence, what would happen is we would say that we're going to pay for it out of the IT fund, but if it becomes eligible for CARES Act funding, if we feel like that qualifies and we've checked and double checked, then we would relieve it, renew the technology fund back to its original level and pay for it out of the CARES Act.
Question about that really quick. Is that something that can be, so I may have missed, you may have covered CARES Act funding already, and I apologize, work went over today. Is that something that can be added to the budget once we find out if CARES Act funding would cover it? Or just in order to get CARES Act funding, do you have to have it budgeted already?
Zach, Denise, let me chime in here if I can. We're trying to get more clear on that. It can't be in our budget. So this was added into our budget after the CARES Act. So we're going to try to pay for it with CARES Act. It'll have to come through a budget amendment process with us, but we may need to take it out of this budget and put it in the CARES Act budget amendment with the CARES Act money.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because a $500,000, one-time expense in a year where we're cutting.
Right.
If we're not getting special money for that, I don't want to budget for it this year.
It was one of the things, even if we weren't getting special money for it though, in order to be able to kind of make the personnel cuts work, we've got to improve our digital processes, and we've got to be able to do more transactions online so we can have less staff intensive transactions. If that's part of the funding, part of the reasoning behind the funding request. It allows us to keep our personnel costs down over time.
And these are one-time expenses, which is why they're over in this kind of fund. We also have the new website. So we have budgeted $150,000 in this to put the website together initially. It would be a one-time expense. And then the maintenance of it ongoing would be in what we budgeted over in the general fund. This is a guesstimate. We have not put out for RFP on the website until we made sure that we had funding for it. But for instance, some of the things that I don't know if we can continue with this website, the one that we're using now, I have put the consolidated fee schedule, and Tani has put it on that website over and over and over again. And for some reason, the website eats it up and puts the 2017 one back on there. There's just no controlling this anymore with the current Wix system that we're using. It's just not working. And it's limiting our ability to allow our customer engagement as far as like payment processes go. And it's just really limiting us. So this would be another thing that may be eligible for CARES Act funding. We're not sure, but we would like to have a new website no matter what to really support our city in at a better service level. And in addition, there's also $50,000 in here for legal discovery software as well. That's recommended by our legal department as well as the Justice Court. So again, those are things that you can fund or unfund. Those are things that were recommended in the mayor's budget, but again, this becomes your budget as of now. Then the risk management fund, we did a new risk cost allocation model. We developed it this year. It's one that I've used in several other cities, and it worked really well. We're basing it now on property and 5-year claim history for whatever the service is. So now the enterprise funds are actually paying for their portion of insurance premiums, which they should have been doing all along. And the general fund is paying for its portion versus just paying for all of it. The general fund was paying for all liability insurance, and that should not be the case. There's no other significant financial changes to this fund. Any questions? Okay. Capital projects. So we have, well, this slide didn't get formatted, but we have about $36 million of capital projects that we're going to bring to you. We're going to go over those really quickly, just so you have a list in one place of what those look like. This is a graph of how they look financially. The majority of them are roads projects because we have quite a bit of legislative money that's been given to us that now we're ready to start on those projects. So we're going to work on that. Our road projects are on page 207 of your budget, and they're laid out by funding type. So that 13th West project, north to south border, is the beginning of the 13th West project. Right now, we're asking for $7.3 million to be spent on that project, but $7 million of it was grant money. So it was legislated to us through Senate bills or House bills or through UDOT grants. So it could be through WFRC as well. 235,000 of it will be impact fee related, so developer cost, and then 58,000 will be general fund related, so general capital. So it's a $7.4 million project. 78 South, 13th West to SR 111. This is also legislative money. This was actually legislated several years ago as well, and that's a $2.5 million grant. So we will be asking for that as well. And then 86 South, we'll be starting that. 56 to 60th West, 1.7 of it is grant money, 300 impact fee, and no general capital. We've really cut back on any projects that have any capital funds related because this fund is negative right now and we can't push it any further in the hole. So our instructions to Public Works have been to manage and not get rid of, but to do the projects for anything that had any UDOT money in it or any legislated money, so that we can have projects moving forward, but we're not putting any further stress on the general fund. All right, park projects. We need a little discussion on this one. Your park projects are on page 213, and it's a 5-year plan. Brian has requested that we change the order of the parks a little bit. He would like to finish the Maple Hills Park over this next year and delay the Ron Wood Park improvements outside of just the pickleball court. So this fiscal year, he would finish Maple Hills. He would do the pickleball court in Ron Wood Park, and then there's a development reimbursement of $75,000 that is from an improvement a developer's done previously. The question to you is, Maple Hills was slated after Ron Wood Park, but he feels like it's been delayed so many times that he would like to move it up and get it off the list and then start working on Ron Wood Park in phases. But it will take longer for us to accomplish the work on Ron Wood Park because we're going to have to accumulate some funding for it over time with impact fees, because it's all impact fee related, and the impact fees or the actual capital for that fund is actually negative, and we can't throw it in the hole. So Ron Wood Park would not be able to occur until 2023. We do a little bit in 2022, maybe some design work, and then the majority of it would be 2023 and 2024 to complete it. Does anyone have any comments or questions about switching those projects, completing Maple Hills before Ron Wood Park?
Denise, can I chime in here?
Please.
So the reasoning behind this too is rather than have two unfinished projects, it'll save money and mobilization costs too. So if we go through and we do Maple Hills, of course, Ron Wood, to phase it out, how we were going to phase it was a lot more money than the Maple Hills. So I wanted to move forward with Maple Hills, get that one completed. Still build the pickleball courts in Ron Wood, you know, and offering that service to the residents, because that is a needed amenity that we don't really have here yet. And then the next phase of Ron Wood, we could start in design would be the skate park. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. Instead of having two unfinished projects going, I would prefer just to finish one and the cheaper of the projects, and get that one done, and then move on to full design of Ron Wood Park. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Any comment?
I'm good with that.
No objection here.
So I was just wondering, so we don't have I thought when we talked about Ron Wood Park, I thought we had most of the design done. Done.
We didn't hear a word you said.
It sounds like you're on the Mars Observer.
Here, well,
It's your connection, Calvin. It's not your mic, it's your connection.
all right, I'll disconnect and try to hook back in.
Now, if you kill your video, that might help.
Talk now, Calvin.
Brian, is design all done on Ron Wood?
No, it wasn't. We started concept design is all that was. When the designs that we brought to council a few months back was just concept. We didn't really want to go into full design until we have a clear picture of what we're wanting to do there and what the need is. So no, it hasn't been designed yet. The pickleball courts will be designed, but that's all on Ron Wood. That's all that will be designed on Ron Wood right now. Once we start phasing, moving forward, phasing other amenities and things, that's when we'll start as a full design on that, and when we have the money available.
And remind me, please, pickleball, because it is less expensive and it was on the higher end of user requests, kind of like the skateboard park. Is that why?
Well, both. Sorry, Councilmember Pack. Both amenities were rated pretty high. We just the need for pickleball courts are a little higher right now than a skateboard park. So we felt just at least getting that designed and installed, at least offering that amenity to the residents, and then down the road again, like I've said, just we'll start phasing that Ron Wood Park in. And the other thing we got to look at too, keep in mind is, down the road, I hope we can keep these soccer fields out here one way or the other. If not, we're going to have to replace a few of these fields to accommodate. No, we don't have to, but I'd like to replace these fields to accommodate West Jordan youth at the minimum.
Great, thank you.
So Brian, when you say the pickleball court is higher requested or whatever, where are we getting that data from?
I believe there was a survey sent out, and then with the open houses we held with both Maple Hills and Ron Wood, and then the continual calls that we received to ask where our pickleball courts are.
They're in South
I've
Jordan.
also heard more people at the pickleball court.
So just a heads up too, right now we're working on converting 2 tennis courts at Constitution Park into pickleball courts, which will accommodate some of the need on the east side, but it's not enough. So that's kind of why we wanted to move forward with the pickleball courts.
I'm fine switching them around, especially since if we don't, Zach will have a coronary for one, but mostly because we've already had like 2 or 3 meetings with those Maple Hills folks.
I just want to know what Zach gave Brian to get Brian to do this.
I'll have you know, I saw my cardiologist this week and I'm doing okay. So.
No, you just gave him the car. You didn't have to bribe him.
It'll be good, and again, it'll save money as far as mobilization costs. Because if we start Maple Hills and do half of it, then we're waiting for more money, paying a contractor twice to come in and mobilize, and it gets expensive.
See, no bribery required.
I guess we better give Brian something that he wants.
Thank you.
So Brian, just
A high five once it's socially acceptable.
hey Brian, just a quick question on that. So repurposing tennis courts for pickleball courts out at Constitution Park. No, I know that the pavilion is there, you know, it's kind of landlocked. I guess you could go to the south side by the playground if you put new ones in, but what's the cost difference of keeping a tennis, you know, just taking away one amenity to provide another? And I know there's 4 courts there, I believe. So I guess would there still be 2 courts there, but then put in 4 pickleball courts on the other 2? Couldn't we expand for just about, I mean, I guess you'd just be resurfacing the existing concrete. So that would be a lot cheaper, right? Is that why you're saying to do that? I just hate to take away one amenity at the expense of another.
Yeah, I mean, that was before we decided to move forward with Ronwood. That was with the bond, the original bond money that was bonded 4 years ago for park improvements. That was part of the project list, was converting 2 of those courts over. It's about it's going to be about $58,000 to convert 2 of those courts into pickleball courts, which will be, I believe 4 pickleball courts, if I remember right.
Right. Yeah, you can put 2 on 1, and so
Yeah.
that would be less expensive than just extending it and laying another slab to put down the 4. That'd be a lot more money.
Absolutely, because they're post-tension courts too. They're high quality courts. I mean, they're decent courts that we built those in both in Veterans Park and Constitution Park, where they did the post-tension slabs that they move so you don't crack.
Right. Yeah. Post tension is definitely the way to go. I mean, I'm not a project engineer, but I know that much about tennis court construction. Definitely
Sure.
to do post tension. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you.
I crack when I move. Just throwing that out there.
Okay, so the other
Little
ones,
humor, people.
That's all I have. So thanks.
other projects that are included in your budget are the money that's remaining for the construction of the Community Arts Center that's been budgeted at 5.7 million. We do recommend that you just hold on that project, but it is being budgeted. And then a building maintenance of 950,000. There's nothing that's specifically earmarked for that, but we know that there's quite a bit of building maintenance that's needed in City Hall and the Justice Center and some of the other buildings that are aged throughout the city. So they need some money for some maintenance needs. All right, you have one water project because I've held the water projects back. It's the Airport Reserve Replacement Reservoir. We're upsizing it as well as replacing it. It's mandated by the Division of Drinking Water for us to replace, but we want to upsize it at the same time. So that project will be going forward. There's also going to be a water master plan that will occur that same year as well, next year. So that's in your budget as well. Wastewater projects, there's several. South Valley reclamation projects tend to be the majority of them, and they tend to be about $3.6 to $4 million a year for the next several years. So that's the majority of where our sewer fees go, is straight over to South Valley reclamation. This year, there's a large slip line project that's going to occur. Then we have pipe hole and manhole maintenance projects that we have to do every year. And that's part of that utility fee. And then there's some pipeline extensions and upgrades. So sizing upgrades that will occur. So that will be about $6.2 million. We have stormwater projects in the amount of $2.4 million. 13th West is a utility project. And then they would like to start the design and property acquisition for Barney's Wash Retention Area. And that's quite a large project, but it's impact and development related. And so there are impact fees available to pay for that project. And this is one of the utility funds that has positive impact fees. So this is a good place for us to start spending that. And then this is the streetlight project. So one of the council's requests was for beautification of the city, and lighting is one of those areas. And so we've given you a hefty list of streetlight projects. They're all utility based. There'll be no fee increase in the utility fund for streetlights. We're using the fund balance that we have been collecting over the last 3 years. on these projects. So we hope that you're going to see some real change in the city with many of these streetlight projects going forward. Okay, we okay for another 50 minutes? Yep, okay, we're gonna go. Whoops, wrong way. The water fund. All right, so the water fund. There's a 0% rate increase this year, but there are a reorganization of the rates, which we've talked about at length from January through February and maybe even December. There is a 5-year plan now in the water fund that will require a 2% rate increase per year. And that's because we conditioned the capital projects so that they're only spending $4 million a year on projects. Will we have impact fees and development fees positive? Not during that time period. The projects that have been development related will probably not be reimbursed and back into the positive for probably a decade. But in the meantime, we are moving forward on as many things as we can. What are the rates versus the consumption? I know we had these discussions a lot in January about, okay, well, residents consumes 56% water, commercials 31%. The rate structure that we've provided you reflect the instructions that we were given on, or that I was given during the work session on January 22nd. And then we met with businesses on the 23rd and received further instruction from you on the 20th. And then I received a memo on the 24th. And then we spoke again on February 12th, which were the final instructions, because I was like, I can't come doing this again. So the instructions from you were to go to make tier 1 the same between commercial and residential and make sure it was lower. So we originally came to you on January 22nd with a tier 1 rate of $2.50 for residential and $1.88 for commercial. You wanted that equalized. That is the biggest tier use because everyone uses that first tier. So that will naturally affect the other tiers. So we set the tier 1 rate at what you'd requested at $2.25 for both commercial and residential. And then we adjusted the rest of the rates to bring in the revenues that were equal to what the request was. So previously, or under our current water fund rates, the ones that are effective through what we're proposing September 30th, they currently provide 71% of the revenue, but only consume 56% of the water, 22% of the revenue, 31% of the water. The ones we're proposing are 66% of the revenue, 28% of the revenue for commercial, landscaping is at 4%, and then the city will be providing 2%. And that's because we adopted a government rate for the city use that will be just the wholesale rate for just the city. So these are the rates that were in the memo on January 24th. And then the next to it where it says current, the rates that were in the budget are the ones that were proposed after council interaction on February 12th. So they bring in the exact same revenue as we received last year, or close to, as close as I could get when you're managing 28,000 accounts in different water use. Are there any questions about the water fund, or it's sustainable right now? I think that it has a small and regular rate increase. Operations and capital are normalized, or at least conditioned, so that it's something that is more financially sustainable than it has been in the past.
Right, and thank you. That 2% rate increase per year, I think that mitigates a lot of the problems that we've seen in the past, and then having to do a huge hike. So I think that keeps pace with inflation, and just smart to have incremental instead of kicking it down the road and having that crisis mode. So thank you.
It also allows us to know that the rate structure that we're proposing supports conservation as well as supports equity between the different user types. So I think that was important.
So from a long-term perspective, I don't want to deal with this year, but you have the 5-year plan. But I think one of the things that as we move forward, looking at next year's water rates and encouraging conservation, is that I would like us, and like I said, at least to have these discussions next year about the landscape user and the rates for the landscape user. And the reason why I say that is we're obviously using a lot, 4% of the water supply is on landscapes in West Jordan City, along with whatever the residential users are. But their first 7,000 gallons is also the same rate. If I remember right, it's about the same rate as the people who require, as a personal necessity to eat, clothe, those kind of things. And I'm just thinking that instead of raising water rates 2% across the board next year, I would like to see us look at, I think overall the fundamental, I agree with the fundamental. We need to increase the water rates incrementally every year, but I think we need to also take a look at where maybe some targeted rates so that the landscape encourages conservation, and maybe even a slight incremental, because we made a big one this year and maybe next year's not the one, but the year after, an incremental increase so that the commercial subsidy from the residents is not quite so high, even if that's just another 1% or 2% over the next 2 or 3 years to move that closer. I think that's long-term where I'd like to go. And so at least have the discussions. Does that make sense?
We absolutely every year should come back and look at the philosophies and the policies related to how rates are set. So I think those are good pre-budget discussions. And we should do exactly what we did this year. We had 6 sessions on water rates, and they were dynamic and instructive. And so I think that we probably don't need as many the next time, just because now you're educated on it. But I think that's really important for us to review the rates and then look at them and make sure that they're appropriate still with the use too, because you may have a large commercial user come in that may skew that a little bit. So
right,
we definitely can look at those every year. Thank you. We would do that as a policy, as budget committee, and then as a council.
Well, and I think that gives.
Oh, and the utility rate committee, sorry.
Yep, I was going to say the utility rate committee would be a perfect place to start some of those discussions next, late next fall, early winter.
Right, and we will know, right? Because we want, I think we agreed that once we talked to the business community and we really weighed the pros and cons of how this is going to impact them, that we gave them through October 1st to get through. So this summer is still going to be painful with residents. I'm not going to lie. But on October 1st, when those new rates go into effect, it's really going to be tough on the business owners. So we need to make sure that, that timing, but by January and February, I'll have some good data, right? Those rates will go into effect and I'll know how that is kind of reflecting in that distribution. So I think it will be good for us to start that discussions in like January. Thanks. All right, the wastewater sewer fund, page 245. The first thing is that this fund is going to have a 15% rate increase this year. And the 5-year plan will need it to do a 15% rate increase for 2 more years. Remember, this is that fund that has such a heavy burden from some of the EPA regulations that are requiring us to redo some of the things at the South Valley Water Reclamation Facility. And so it's a large burden. And so I put this chart on the right-hand side for you, revenue to expense. So you can kind of see expenses are right at where our revenues are, and there wasn't much room for us to give outside of those rate increases. So we will need 15% a year. You'll see that the fund balance for the next 2 years is really low. It gets down to $350,000, which is super low for this kind of a fund, especially when it's a $12 million revenue fund, $12 and $15 million. But so we're coming really, really tight. But we believe that we can sustain it, or if we have those 15% rate increases, instead of doing that hefty big one, I'd rather just do a little bit at a time. I don't want to say 15% is a little bit, but it's as little as possible to sustain a fund balance. And then after that, we'll have no increase, and some of that capital requirement kind of eases off of us a little bit. And so we can say, you know, we're going to hold this rate for a couple of years, and you can see how revenue is still exceeding expense during those years. The solid waste fund. This is also where we'll have to have a slight increase, a 7.5% rate increase. So the base fee goes from $16.04 to $17.25. The 5-year plan will require a 2% rate increase per year. The dumpster rental program that's being proposed would continue to be subsidized, which is why that cost savings isn't the entire year. We've already advertised and had dumpsters scheduled through December 31st under our current year. So that would be changing January 1st. We would like to propose that we would maybe initiate a neighborhood dumpster program where during the spring, summer, and fall months, we would put multiple dumpsters in a common area, park area or neighborhood area if they so choose, and allow that program to be subsidized by the city, but we would do it on a limited basis. So it would still provide a free service to residents that might not want to rent a dumpster, but would still be able to provide a significant cost savings to the solid waste fund overall. And then an ending fund balance for this fund in general is very, very low. It's between 5 and 7% of the revenues. So it's under $500,000. That one makes me just a little nervous because as you saw this month, when we had tipping fees increase 46%, that's not being absorbed, you know, that wasn't budgeted for by any means. So that's where fund balance is going to come in. If we have something like that happen where tipping fees is exceeded, or there's a period of time when a cost is exceeded, or we have a natural disaster that we have to do cleanup from, we typically would take it from the solid waste fund, but those reserves are very, very low. So we want to make sure that we're aware of that.
So
yeah, go ahead.
My question is, since we're part of the Transjordan landfill, and we're one of those partners that pays for that, why did the tipping fees go up so much? I mean, I know that there was a run on the dump because it was shut and we had a lot of people cleaning out their houses and they made a run. But it seems to me that somehow, and I don't want to say there's a windfall, but it seems to me that, and I don't get this, is that our garbage is pretty steady. I mean, you know, the weekly garbage collection seems really steady, and it should be reasonably steady because everybody's got the same number of cans every week. Why did we end up paying more for the tipping fees when we're part of that dump project? And it was the residential extra waste that caused the run on the dump. Does that make sense?
We pay tipping fees based on a ton. So it's $16 a ton, I believe, right now. It's going to $18 a ton next year. And so there's just been extra tonnage. So people filling up their cans all the way, their extra cans are full, their neighbors' cans are full, the dumpsters around the city are full. So it's extra tonnage that is taken to the landfill over the last month because everybody's been home and cleaning out their houses.
Okay.
Denise, also other cities, ACE, talking to ACE, other cities are experiencing similar tonnage. And
Everybody.
was closed. Yeah, everyone's home cleaning.
Denise, My question is, when I look on page, whatever this says, 260, and the solid waste 5-year plan, does that include what Mr. Newton brought to us as far as their plan to increase prices so that when we move to the dump in Utah County that it's covered? Is that included in here?
Yeah, I have a cost later in here for that. Yes. Now, will it include, because we won't be moving yet at that point, but it will be close. So I'm sure once that transfer station goes into place, our fees are going to go up substantially. And yes, we would have to increase fees at that point.
Right, but Mr. Newton suggested or said something about that they were going to raise their fees.
They are, and that's included in this budget. They did raise their tipping fees from 16 to 18 this year, and then it's going to go from 18 to 20 and 20 to 22, so that they are gradually bringing us up, and at the same time we're raising our rates too, so that there's not such a huge financial impact to the resident.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Okay, you can see revenue to expense here on the right, and then you can see what the proposed base rates are with the 2% rate increase over those 5 years. And the last one that we want to talk about is the stormwater fund. So this one will have a 5% rate increase. It's more modest than what was proposed under the previous study. A 5-year plan will require a 10% rate increase per year going forward. So it was the 5-year plan. Not the 5-year. The rate study had a 24% increase every year on the stormwater fund for the next 3 years. We conditioned the capital so that we could bring those rates down and normalize them a bit. The mayor really was focused on the first year being as low as possible to get us by, and then adding those rate increases over the next 5 years. So we smoothed the capital plan to about $2.5 million a year. And that brought those rate increase demands down. We believe that we hope that we can cap the rate increases at about $8.58. We don't believe that there'll be a need for us to increase tremendously after that. That's pretty much where most cities are saying that their stormwater fund, not stormwater fee, their fee per ERU is headed towards and needs to be. Almost everyone's right at like $9 and $10 as their goal within the next few years. And that's our goal as well. So we're right in line with all the other municipalities that are managing a utility similar to this. And then you can see the revenue to expense. We're kind of dipping down into some revenues every now and then we come back up. So you can see that revenues are that fee increase can't really go anywhere. We really kind of need that to sustain ourselves on that solid waste fund. So council, you've been really attentive for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I'm about have no voice left. What we want, or what I would like to have next week, would be that you have sticky notes galore in your budget book, that you, I will send you the slide deck and you can look at it to your heart's content and ask as many questions as you want. But next week, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to do what you want me to do with the council majority. So Council Member McConaughey, or Chairman McConaughey, will lead the discussion, and he'll lead the direction as to where we want to go with this budget. And we hope that maybe we can get the majority of the discussions done next week and we won't have to meet again. But again, that's in your capable hands. So thank you for dedicating some time this early and so quickly. And thank you for listening and for participating.
Denise, may I please ask a question?
Yes.
Well, and thank you again for all of your dedicated work. I mean, just the time and effort that you put into this. Wonderful. Thank you. As I, as I've got the book in front of me here, I'm curious, and I know that this would just be a little bit of conjecture and kind of taking a shot in the dark, but when we have decrease in workforce of, let's say, like parks, maintenance, sooner or later there's increased costs in deferred maintenance, or so we're spending less on payroll, but then sooner or later there's going to be reciprocal going up. But then the inverse is true too. Like, let's say website, that's a lot of money for a new website, but reciprocally, it would probably bring down cost of services or personnel that would be needing to answer phones or do legwork. Would there be any way of getting a best guess of savings on that so that we could actually see? Does that make sense? It's hard to, exactly put a price on that, but that those compensatory factors up and down.
100%. I totally see where you're going. Some kind of cost recovery, right? So if in essence, I would use this as a, for instance, one of the positions that was vacant in community development, they gave that position up. The person had just retired very recently. And Scott said, if I give that up, like I can get software in exchange. I cannot fill that position forever. Like I don't need that position. And so that position was about $125,000 when it's fully loaded with benefits. So there's a cost recovery of 3 years, but how long that software benefits us, and there's more cost recovery than that in additional staff time that'll be saved, right? So absolutely, I believe that we can give you something that will say, if we get a new website, here's how many hours, our customer service staff are answering questions about how to pay your bill or how to do this, or our event staff is, not able to sell this kind of product, or we're not able to distribute this kind of information quickly. I believe that we certainly can give you something, the benefits of it.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I just want to say thanks. I mean, I know that it's your job and you get paid to do it. But as I said several council meetings ago when we were actually in person, I watch this staff on a regular basis and have for years in my volunteering, that you don't just work a 40-hour work week. So when you actually take your salary, it probably is about $2 an hour. So, I working in the chamber, I can relate, because people would say, how much do you make? Oh, about 12 cents an hour, because you put way more time in, and I know that, and I respect that. And I want to thank you and Corbin and everybody really on the staff, that I know you go way above and beyond putting this stuff together beyond the regular work hours. So thank you for all your time on it.
Thanks.
You
All right,
too,
Corbin.
Corbin.
Cheers.
Were there any other questions or comments for this evening? If not, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
Can I make one more comment?
Okay.
I'm anyway. So I think the Memorial Day thing is awesome. I don't see Tani on here and the events people, but what a great idea. I saw that on Facebook. I shared it. I hope to be part of it. I want to go out and help out. But what a fabulous idea on top of all the other things that we're dealing with. But to come up with something so creative, to have a classic car show parade with our public works and our firefighters and the rest of it go around the city. I think that's such a neat idea. So kudos to the staff on that, and whoever's idea it was. Fantastic.
We told our events person, Lindsay, you don't have the help. It's half the staff you used to have. You got to hold events with no money, and you can't socialize, and you can't have a crowd. Good luck. And she's been really creative, and she came up with ideas and ways to try to still get people out and still celebrate. So this was a very good idea of hers. She pulled it together. She's doing fantastic.
Yeah, I was super impressed. I volunteered to help too, but I got pretty much told that they got it all handled, but I still want to help. I mean, I think it's an awesome idea. So fantastic. Tell her I said so, or I will tell her myself as well.
Hey, now I'll give you a motion to adjourn.
Okay, sorry, second.
Yeah. Let's, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Stand adjourned. Thanks.
Happy Memorial Day.